The ballroom shimmered under 1,000 golden lights, chandeliers glistening like captive stars. The scent of champagne and ambition filled the air as the city's elite gathered to celebrate the annual Arden Foundation Gala, a night of wealth, reputation, and quiet wars hidden behind polite smiles. At the center of it all stood Evelyn Arden, the queen of influence, dressed in a gown that whispered power with every movement. She was the woman everyone feared, envied, and obeyed. Her empire spanned fashion, media, and politics, a web so vast that even the most powerful men bent under her will. And somewhere among the guests that evening stood Adrian Cole, quiet, composed, and invisible to most. Once upon a time, he had been Evelyn's most trusted advisor, the mind behind her early success. But that was before she decided that he had become too valuable, before she publicly humiliated him at this very gala 2 years ago, calling him a brilliant servant who forgot he was replaceable. The laughter that followed still echoed in Adrian's memory like a wound that never healed. That night, he had smiled, bowed politely, and walked away. He never raised his voice, never sought revenge, not then. Evelyn thought she had crushed him, but she hadn't realized that Adrian's silence was not defeat. It was patience. Now he was back. In the months after his downfall, Adrian had vanished from public sight, while whispers circulated that he'd gone bankrupt, exiled, or insane. None of them were true. In truth, he had quietly built something far more dangerous, a network of forgotten people Evelyn had used and discarded, former employees, ruined partners, silenced journalists, all the broken pieces she'd left behind. Adrian gathered them, not with promises of power, but with truth. Tonight marked the beginning of his masterpiece. He watched Evelyn from across the room as she charmed a senator with that familiar, deceptive smile. She didn't notice the subtle tension in the air, the way her investors whispered in hushed tones, the way her assistant kept glancing at her phone nervously. Adrian had spent months planting seeds, financial leaks, anonymous tips, scandals waiting to erupt like silent landmines. But destruction was not his goal, not yet. He wanted her to feel cornered, to sense the walls closing in, but not know where the attack was coming from. He wanted her to experience the same slow unraveling she once gifted him. As the orchestra swelled, Evelyn took the stage to make her speech, radiant, untouchable. "Power," she said, her voice echoing elegantly, "is not about what you take. It's about what people give you willingly." Adrian smiled faintly from the shadows. He whispered under his breath, "Then let's see what they're willing to take back." Outside, dozens of reporters received simultaneous anonymous emails, documents, recordings, photos, evidence of embezzlement, blackmail, manipulation. Within minutes, phones began buzzing throughout the ballroom. Evelyn noticed it too, the ripple of distractions spreading through her audience like a virus. She faltered, just for a second. That single moment of hesitation was enough. Adrian turned away, stepping out into the cool night. Above him, the sky hung heavy with the promise of rain. Poetic, he thought, that the storm would break tonight. He had no need to witness her fall. The process was already in motion. By morning, her empire would begin to crack. First, the investors pulling out, then the media turning on her, then the government inquiries. Evelyn Arden, the woman who built her kingdom on humiliation and fear, would watch it dissolve piece by piece. But destiny, Adrian knew, had a dark sense of irony, because when the empire finally burned, she wouldn't just lose her wealth or reputation. She would discover something worse, that the one person she once mocked had become the architect of her ruin. And when she finally tracked him down, weeks later, disheveled, furious, standing at the edge of everything she'd lost, she asked him just one question, her voice trembling with disbelief. Why? Adrian looked at her for a long moment, the flicker of old hurt passing through his eyes. Then he said quietly, "Because you taught me how power works." But even then, Evelyn didn't understand, not yet, that Adrian's vengeance wasn't over, because while her fortune crumbled in public, he had set his sights on something far more personal, her legacy. It wasn't enough that she lost her wealth. Adrian wanted to erase the very myth of Evelyn Arden, the legend she had spent decades crafting. The elegant woman in the magazines, the philanthropist on charity boards, the inspirational icon quoted by women who didn't know the cruelty behind her smile. All of it had to vanish. He wasn't after destruction anymore. He was after silence, the kind that leaves people wondering if she ever truly existed. Evelyn's world had shrunk to whispers and headlines. Her penthouse was sold under bankruptcy proceedings, her name scrubbed from the company she had built, her so-called allies refusing her calls. She'd gone from commanding rooms full of powerful men to standing alone in hotel lobbies where no one recognized her. Every channel she turned to spoke of her downfall with a mixture of fascination and contempt. Former business magnate Evelyn Arden faces investigation for financial misconduct. The words played like a funeral hymn. And yet, somewhere deep inside her, a flicker of defiance remained. Evelyn had survived wars of reputation before, but never one so calculated, so precise. She couldn't trace where it began. There were too many leaks, too many sources, all perfectly timed. The kind of precision only one person she knew was capable of. Adrian. The realization came slowly, then all at once. She remembered his calm eyes at the gala, the faint smile that should have warned her. She had thought him harmless, forgettable. Now she understood the danger of a quiet man with a wounded heart. But Evelyn Arden was not a woman who accepted defeat. She began digging. What little influence she had left, she used to trace the trail. The anonymous tips, the shell companies, the leaks. And the more she searched, the more one name began to appear in fragments, hidden beneath aliases and signatures. A. Cole. Meanwhile, Adrian's world thrived in the shadows. He had no public presence, no company under his name, no interviews or appearances. His influence moved like an invisible current. Investors following his quiet advice, media figures taking direction from unseen hands. He had become what Evelyn once was, untouchable. And then he walked away, leaving her standing in that gilded room filled with people who no longer knew her name. Outside, the rain began again, harder this time. Adrian stepped into the street, the reflection of city lights shimmering on wet pavement. He didn't look back, but somewhere in the distance, the echoes of her defiance followed him, faint, but still alive. He knew this wasn't over. Evelyn Arden was too proud to vanish quietly. There would be a counterattack, subtle, intelligent, desperate. And when it came, he would be ready. Because revenge, Adrian had learned, was not an act. It was an art. And the masterpiece was still unfinished. And in every masterpiece, the final brushstroke mattered most. Weeks passed. The world moved on, but Evelyn didn't. The name Evelyn Arden had become a cautionary tale, whispered in business circles, dissected on talk shows, mocked in articles about the rise and fall of power. Yet, in quiet corners of the city, her influence began to stir again. She still had contacts, the kind who owed her favors too dark to repay. Her nights became sleepless, haunted by memories of her empire and by the man who'd taken it all, the man she'd once dismissed as the help. But as rage gave way to clarity, she began to see something that changed everything. Adrian hadn't destroyed her by chance. He'd used her own systems against her, her networks, her deals, her methods of control. He'd learned from her, imitated her, evolved past her. That realization didn't break her. It sharpened her. One cold evening, she stood by the window of a small apartment in the city's old quarter, a cigarette glowing between her fingers. Below, neon lights flickered against the rain-drenched streets, a mirror of the world she'd once owned. She didn't plan to rebuild the same empire. No. She was crafting something leaner, smarter, invisible. And it began with a whisper, a single post from an anonymous account exposing the silent circle, a secret network of financiers and information brokers quietly manipulating markets. A network that, if traced carefully, led straight to Adrian Cole. The irony made her smile. While he had taken her empire of glamour and wealth, he had built one of shadows and influence, and she would expose it, not with scandal or noise, but with the same quiet precision he had used against her. Adrian, meanwhile, had grown comfortable in his dominion. His days were spent orchestrating deals that crossed borders, industries, even governments. His word carried weight in rooms he never entered. Yet something in him remained unsettled. Each success brought satisfaction, but no peace. It was as if he had trapped himself in the same web he had woven for her. His assistant entered the office one morning with a hesitant expression. "Sir, you'll want to see this." The headline read, "Anonymous source leaks data suggesting a hidden financial syndicate known as the Silent Circle." Adrian stared at it for a long moment, then laughed softly, not with amusement, but recognition. "She's still alive," he murmured. He should have expected it. Evelyn Arden was too intelligent to go quietly. He admired the precision of her play. Subtle, deliberate, and dangerously familiar. In that moment, he felt a strange pull, not of anger, but of nostalgia. The game was beginning again, only now their roles had reversed. That night, Adrian attended a private gathering, a discreet meeting of the same kind of powerful figures who once worshipped Evelyn. It was here that his control began to falter. As he spoke with investors, he noticed unease, questions, doubt. Someone had started feeding them information. Someone who knew his structure, his timing, his methods. And only one person in the world could know those things. Later, in the solitude of his apartment, he poured himself a glass of whiskey and opened a file on his encrypted system. He traced the leak to a single IP, disguised, rerouted through multiple countries. But the style of phrasing in the messages, the rhythm of the writing, it was unmistakable. Evelyn's hand. He smiled, a low, tired smile. "So, this is what we've become," he said quietly. The next morning, he sent a message to one of his contacts, an old journalist who had once worked for Evelyn before Adrian recruited him. Find her. For days, the search yielded nothing. Evelyn had disappeared from known circles, her traces wiped clean. But then one evening, Adrian received a message with coordinates, an abandoned estate outside the city, once one of Evelyn's lesser-known properties. When he arrived, the mansion stood silent under a canopy of overgrown ivy. Inside, faint light flickered through the dust, a fire burning in the hearth. She was there, seated calmly, as if she'd been expecting him all along. "Welcome back, Adrian," she said, her voice steady. "You took your time." He didn't sit. "You're getting sloppy. The leak was clever, but I saw through it." "Of course you did," she replied with a small smile. "I wanted you to." Her tone was unnerving, confident, composed. She rose from her chair, approaching him slowly, her eyes sharp despite the exhaustion on her face. "You wanted balance, remember? You said it wasn't revenge. But balance doesn't exist, Adrian. It never did. Power only shifts. And now it's shifting again." He studied her, searching for weakness but saw none. There was something almost regal about her defiance, the same energy that had once built an empire. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel. Respect. "You think you can rebuild?" "No," she answered, stepping closer. "I can evolve." A silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of history. Two predators circling the same territory, each knowing the other too well to strike carelessly. Adrian finally said, "You could have stayed gone. You could have disappeared, lived quietly. Why come back?" Evelyn's eyes glinted in the firelight. "Because you can't destroy a queen on her own board." He laughed softly, almost admiringly. "And what's your next move, then?" She leaned close enough for him to feel her breath. "You'll see. But when it happens, I won't humiliate you the way I did before. You'll destroy yourself this time, quietly, completely, the way you taught me." Adrian stepped back, the words hitting him harder than he expected. He realized then that this was no longer about revenge or justice. It was about dominance. They were bound by the same hunger, the same need to outmaneuver each other until one disappeared from the game entirely. As he left the estate, the night air felt colder, heavier. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled, the beginning of another storm. He didn't look back, but her voice lingered in his mind, steady and certain. The next morning, the first blow landed. One of his key accounts, a silent partner in Europe, suddenly withdrew billions in assets, then another, then another. The network he'd built so carefully began to fracture, not through force, but persuasion. Someone had whispered doubt into the right ears, someone who knew exactly where to strike. Evelyn had learned well. And as Adrian watched the data collapse across his screens, a grim smile formed on his lips. The masterpiece, it seemed, was now painting itself. He stared at the cascading data, numbers vanishing, accounts freezing, red alerts flashing like heartbeats on his monitor. Each one represented months of strategy, relationships, manipulation, all slipping through his fingers without a trace of resistance. His empire was bleeding, and he didn't even know where the wound began. Adrian exhaled slowly, forcing calm. Panic was Evelyn's weapon. Precision was his. He leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed, retracing every possible line of attack. She couldn't have done this alone. She didn't have the infrastructure anymore. That meant she'd found allies, people who still owed her loyalty or perhaps owed him revenge. He picked up his phone, dialing one of his oldest operatives, a cybersecurity specialist who'd helped him build the Silent Circles network. The man answered immediately. "She's dismantling us from the inside," he said. There was silence. Then a low voice replied, "Sir, it's not just her. Someone's feeding her data. Someone inside the circle." Adrian froze. Betrayal. That word hit deeper than he wanted to admit. He picked up his phone, dialing one of his oldest operatives, a cybersecurity specialist who helped him build the Silent Circle's network. The man answered immediately. "She's dismantling us from the inside," he said. There was silence. Then a low voice replied, "Sir, it's not just her. Someone's feeding her data. Someone inside the circle." Adrian froze. Betrayal. That word hit deeper than he wanted to admit. "Find out who, and when you do, don't contact me. Just disappear." He ended the call, staring out through the glass wall of his office. Dawn was breaking, thin ribbons of light cutting across the skyline. The city looked serene, unbothered by the quiet war happening beneath its surface. Power, he thought, was an illusion people built to feel safe. But for those who knew how it worked, it was nothing but smoke, shifting and vanishing with the slightest change in wind. By noon, the media had begun whispering again. Stories about market instability, anonymous claims that the Silent Circle was collapsing from internal conflict, exactly what Evelyn wanted. Public suspicion, erosion of confidence. It was surgical, not explosive. She wasn't destroying him fast. She was unthreading him. He needed to act before she cut too deep. Adrian left the office for the first time in days and drove through the rain to an old district, a place he hadn't visited since his early days under Evelyn's mentorship. Back then, she had taught him that control didn't come from wealth or charm, it came from leverage. The person with the right information could move mountains, and somewhere in her past, there was information. Things she had buried so deep even she might have forgotten. He still remembered the name of her old accountant, Thomas Vale, a nervous man who had once handled her offshore accounts, before vanishing after a tax investigation. Adrian had protected the man years ago, quietly relocating him. Now he needed him again. Thomas was hesitant when Adrian appeared at his door. The years had not been kind. His eyes darted nervously, even in his own home. "You shouldn't have come," he muttered. "She'll know. She already knows, and she's coming for both of us." The old man sighed, rubbing his temples. "You don't understand what she kept hidden. It wasn't just money. It was people. Blackmail, insurance, leverage. Everything she needed to control her world. Where is it?" Thomas hesitated, then walked to a bookshelf and pulled out a hollow ledger. Inside was a small, encrypted drive. Everything's in there. Every deal, every name, every weapon she ever used. Adrian took the drive, feeling the weight of it. "This ends her," he said. Thomas gave a sad smile. "It never ends with her. You'll see." Adrian left without another word, unaware that a black car had been parked across the street, engine idling quietly. Inside sat Evelyn, her eyes following him through the rain-streaked glass. She had known he'd come for the drive. She had counted on it. By the time Adrian reached his office, his system was already under attack. A flood of digital interference, layered codes designed to trigger security lockdowns. He recognized the pattern immediately. Evelyn wasn't trying to steal the data. She wanted him to open it, to use it. He hesitated, then inserted the drive into his system. The files decrypted, revealing thousands of documents, but among them was something new, a hidden message, encoded in her old digital signature. "Welcome to the endgame, Adrian." Then the files began to corrupt. His network, one by one, started shutting down. Servers blinked out, entire archives deleted beyond recovery. It wasn't an attack from outside, it was self-destruction, triggered the moment he accessed her secret archive. She had sacrificed her past to destroy his present. For the first time, Adrian felt true panic. He called his cybersecurity lead, but the line was dead. The entire network had been severed. Years of careful construction, gone in a matter of minutes. And then, almost poetically, the news broke. Headlines lit up across the digital world. Whistleblower exposes underground financial syndicate, the Silent Circle. Names, accounts, and connections were published. A symphony of ruin conducted by a master of exposure. By midnight, government agencies began freezing assets, issuing warrants. Adrian Cole's name appeared at the top of the list. He didn't run. He simply sat in the dim light of his office, the city's pulse beating faintly outside. He knew what had happened. Evelyn had orchestrated this perfectly, forcing him to use the very weapon that destroyed him. And still, despite everything, he couldn't hate her. He could only admire the precision of it all. Hours later, as authorities raided his offices, Adrian slipped away through a back exit, calm, collected, untouchable in his own way. He walked through the silent streets, his coat trailing behind him, and disappeared into the rain. Across the city, in a suite overlooking the skyline, Evelyn watched the news broadcast. Her reflection shimmered faintly against the glass, half smiling. She had regained her power, not by rebuilding, but by reclaiming the art of control, the invisible strings that made others dance. Yet as she stood there, a strange unease crept through her. Because power, she knew better than anyone, was never permanent. It was a flame, brilliant, beautiful, and destined to burn whoever held it too long. And somewhere out there, in the shadows of the same city she had just conquered again, Adrian Cole was still alive. She didn't need proof. She could feel it, the quiet weight of his existence pressing against her thoughts. The game wasn't over. Not yet. For in the end, neither of them wanted peace. They only wanted to be the last one standing when the other finally fell. And the night, deep and endless, waited patiently for its next move. The night stretched long and heavy, draped in silence that carried too many unspoken things. Evelyn poured herself a glass of wine, the deep crimson liquid catching the faint city light. Outside her window, the skyline glimmered like 1,000 eyes watching. Some admiring, others waiting for her to fall again. She stood there, lost in the rhythm of her own thoughts, the faint hum of the city fading into memory.
She should have felt triumphant. She had done the impossible, turned her ruin into resurrection, dismantled the man who had outplayed her, and reclaimed her throne in the shadows. Yet something about her victory tasted bitter, hollow, unfinished. She knew why. Because Adrian wasn't gone. Men like him didn't vanish. They lingered like ghosts, shaping the air without being seen. She had learned to recognize the difference between destruction and silence, and what she heard now, beneath the noise of her success, was silence. The kind that meant he was watching, waiting, building again. Her phone buzzed. It was a message with no sender ID, no traceable source, just 4 words glowing coldly on the screen. Nice move. My turn. She froze, her grip tightening. Her mind raced. No traceable metadata, no ping location. The message had been routed through dozens of encrypted tunnels, the kind only Adrian could construct. She laughed softly, setting down her glass. Of course you'd come back. Across the city, in an abandoned warehouse, lit only by computer screens, Adrian watched the lines of code scrolling faster than his eyes could follow. He had nothing left to lose, which made him infinitely more dangerous. The silent circle was gone, his reputation shattered, his name hunted, but he still had what Evelyn never understood: the trust of people who didn't care about status, only loyalty. They were hackers, whistleblowers, digital ghosts, the forgotten ones, just as he once was. They didn't fear Evelyn Arden, they despised her, and now they followed Adrian not for money, but for purpose. He didn't want to reclaim what he lost. He wanted to end her illusion entirely, to expose every mask she wore until nothing of Evelyn Arden remained but a name people whispered with unease. He turned to his second-in-command, a quiet woman named Leanne, who had once been one of Evelyn's data analysts before Evelyn ruined her career to cover a scandal. He asked, "Is it ready?" Leanne nodded. "Everything. The files, the correspondence, the old contracts, all cross-referenced, time-stamped, and verified. When this goes live, the world will see who Evelyn Arden really is." Adrian looked at the monitor where her face appeared, elegant, poised, confident. "No," he said softly, "they won't see her. They'll see what she builds on other people's pain." He paused, his jaw tightening. "But not yet. We wait. Let her think she's won." Meanwhile, Evelyn began to notice the subtle distortions, the small fractures that hinted something was moving beneath the surface. Her bank alerts flagged irregular login attempts. A few of her political contacts suddenly withdrew from meetings. 2 of her most trusted lawyers resigned without warning. She understood the pattern instantly. He was inside her walls. She called her chief security consultant, an ex-intelligence officer she had on permanent retainer. She ordered, "Find him. Now. I don't care what it takes." The man hesitated. "Evelyn, with respect, we've been monitoring every digital entry point. There's no sign of a breach. It's like he's already here," she interrupted coldly. "He's already in the system. You're just too blind to see it." She ended the call and walked toward her study, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. The room was dark except for the faint blue light of her computer screen. She sat down, opened her secure drive, and began scanning through her communications. Each file she opened seemed intact, untouched. Yet as she scrolled deeper, a strange sensation crept up her spine, like someone breathing over her shoulder. Then she saw it. A single folder she hadn't created, titled only, "Hello, Evelyn." Her finger hovered over the mouse for a moment, then she clicked. The screen blinked, and suddenly her own voice played through the speakers. A recording from years ago. Her voice was calm, commanding, ruthless. "If they resist, make them disappear quietly. No scandals, just silence." Evelyn's pulse raced. That was from a private meeting, one that was never supposed to have been recorded. The screen flickered again, displaying documents, transactions, bank transfers, bribes. All real, all damning. Her hand trembled slightly. "So, that's your move," she whispered. She leaned back, forcing herself to breathe. She knew better than to panic. Every empire, she had once told Adrian, was a stage play. The winner wasn't the one who held the truth, but the one who controlled the story. She wasn't going to let him control this one. Within an hour, she had summoned her last line of defense, a crisis management specialist who handled information wars for billionaires and politicians. Together, they began rewriting narratives, releasing statements, planting false trails, manipulating algorithms to discredit any leak before it gained traction. But Adrian anticipated that. His attack didn't target the media, it targeted memory. He infiltrated her archives, altering metadata, swapping timestamps, erasing witnesses from photographs, rewriting timelines until even her closest allies began to question their recollection of events. Slowly, her own history became unreliable. Evelyn fought back with everything she had, Misinformation, psychological warfare, counterattacks, but Adrian's methods were too subtle, too poetic. He didn't just destroy, he rewrote. One evening, exhausted and sleepless, she looked into a mirror and barely recognized herself. Her reflection seemed older, harsher, as though the shadows under her eyes carried the weight of every battle fought in silence. Her phone buzzed again, another message from the same untraceable number. "You taught me how to build an empire. Now I'll teach you how it feels to watch one fade." Her hand tightened around the device. "You can't erase me," she hissed under her breath. "Not while I'm still breathing." Far away, Adrian closed his laptop and looked out over the rain-slicked streets. He could almost hear her saying those exact words. He knew she'd fight until the last breath, because, in a way, she was him, just older, sharper, more dangerous in her pride. The city glowed beneath him like a chessboard waiting for the next move. Neither of them realized yet that the board itself had begun to shift, that forces far beyond their control were watching both of them now, studying the dance of power and ruin they'd created. Somewhere deep in the shadows of that same city, a new player was preparing to step in, one who had no interest in balance or revenge, but in claiming everything that both Evelyn and Adrian were about to lose. The stranger had no name anyone could trace, no history that could be verified. Those who whispered about him in corporate circles called him the curator, a man who collected power the way others collected art. He didn't destroy empires, he absorbed them, piece by piece, until what had once belonged to others became part of his unseen architecture. For months, he had been watching the war between Evelyn and Adrian unfold with the detachment of a historian studying an ancient rivalry. Two brilliant minds burning each other for pride, one born of control, the other of vengeance. Their chaos was beautiful, but also useful, and as both tore each other apart, the curator began his quiet work, infiltrating their networks, recruiting their abandoned allies, buying the pieces they discarded in anger. Now, both of them were walking straight into his design without realizing it. Adrian, exhausted and half-hunted, had relocated to a safe house on the outskirts of the city. The walls were lined with old servers salvaged from what remained of the Silent Circle. He no longer slept much. Every few hours he checked for signs of Evelyn's counterattacks, but lately the patterns weren't hers. Too efficient, too cold.
He frowned at the lines of code flashing across his screen. Whoever was probing his systems wasn't trying to expose or destroy. They were mapping, collecting, observing. Not her, he muttered to himself. Someone new. Leanne, his quiet lieutenant, appeared at the doorway, clutching a tablet. "We found something. It's not Evelyn. It's bigger. Someone's pulling data from both of you, her systems and ours. Same encryption fingerprint. We traced it to an organization registered in Luxembourg. Name, Curatech Holdings." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "Curatech," he repeated. "That's not a company. That's a shell. Someone's building something new." He leaned forward, scanning the files Leanne handed him. "Find out who owns it." She hesitated. "That's the thing. There's no owner. It's all proxies and blind trusts. Whoever's behind it knows exactly how to hide." Adrian's lips curved into a small, grim smile. "Then we find out by drawing them out." He began typing rapidly, flooding one of his secondary servers with false data, a mock reconstruction of his hidden offshore accounts, laced with digital breadcrumbs leading directly into Evelyn's network. If this curator was truly mapping them, he'd bite. And when he did, Adrian would trace the route back. Across the city, Evelyn sat in her private penthouse again, finally regaining a fraction of her composure. The public scandals had died down. Her name was resurfacing, cautiously, but steadily. Power brokers were beginning to call again, testing the waters. She knew Adrian was still alive, but his silence had stretched long enough to make her uneasy. Silence with him was never peace. She poured herself another drink and turned to her communications terminal. Dozens of unread reports waited, most of them concerning rumors about an unknown entity buying out former Arden assets, factories, trademarks, media outlets. It wasn't Adrian. His methods were surgical. This was systematic acquisition. Her brow furrowed. She summoned her assistant. "Who's buying up these properties?" "We're trying to trace it, ma'am," the assistant said, scrolling through data. "It all leads back to Curitant Holdings. They've acquired 12 of your old subsidiaries in the last 3 months. They're also negotiating with investors who used to back you." Evelyn felt a prickle of irritation. Why am I hearing this now? They're discreet. Too discreet. No visible leadership, no public front. Whoever they are, they're operating through intermediaries. She turned toward the window, her reflection staring back. Colder now. Sharper. Then we'll find the intermediaries, and we'll burn them. For the first time since her war with Adrian began, Evelyn and he found themselves unknowingly chasing the same ghost. The curator watched it unfold with satisfaction. He didn't need to pit them against each other anymore. Their instincts did it for him. He only needed to tighten the web and wait until they both reached the center. By the second week, Adrian's trap triggered. His false server lit up with a new signal, one so carefully concealed it almost went unnoticed, but he caught it. He followed the trail through a maze of digital tunnels, hopping through Hong Kong, Zurich, and Oslo, until it finally landed in an address block registered to a small, nondescript office in Paris. Paris. Evelyn's old headquarters. He stared at the screen for a long time, realization dawning. "Of course," he whispered. "That's how you play it." He took a flight that night. No team, no entourage, just him and a single encrypted drive. He arrived in Paris under a false name, rented an apartment near the old business district, and began tracing the signal again. It led not to a corporate tower, but to an old gallery, its doors sealed, windows covered in dust. He broke in after midnight. Inside, the air smelled of paint and forgotten light. Old portraits hung along the walls, faces of people he didn't recognize. But the deeper he went, the more the patterns emerged. Each face bore something familiar: a business rival, a political figure, a journalist. All of them people who had once belonged to either Evelyn or himself. And beneath each portrait, a small brass plaque engraved with a single phrase: acquired. His stomach turned. The gallery wasn't art. It was inventory. He moved toward a central pedestal, where a single tablet glowed faintly. On it, a message pulsed. "Welcome, Mr. Cole. We've been expecting you." He froze. A figure stepped from the shadows. Tall, composed, dressed in the kind of understated elegance that whispered wealth. "You've built extraordinary things, but you've both wasted them fighting ghosts. I intend to make something better from the ashes you've left behind." Adrian studied him carefully. "You're the curator." The man smiled faintly. "Names are unnecessary. You and Evelyn built empires on information and fear. I build on permanence. I don't destroy, I inherit. And now I own both of you." Adrian's hand twitched toward his pocket, where a hidden transmitter rested. "I don't belong to anyone." The curator tilted his head. "You already do. You just haven't realized it yet." Before Adrian could react, the gallery lights dimmed. The walls flickered with projections. Live feeds of Evelyn's assets, her communications, her accounts, all now redirected under Curatech's control. By the time she learns what's happening, you'll both understand that power doesn't belong to those who fight for it. It belongs to those who wait." Adrian said nothing. He turned and walked out, the chill of the night air slicing across his face. His mind was already racing. Evelyn needed to know, not because he wanted to save her, but because the thought of anyone else destroying her before he finished what he started was unbearable. Somewhere in the Paris night, the first drops of rain began to fall again, and with them came the quiet promise of another storm neither of them could yet see forming. Adrian didn't sleep that night. The rain fell harder as dawn broke, streaking down the window of his rented flat in narrow rivers. Paris was still asleep, the city's hum distant and muted, but his thoughts refused to quiet. Every detail of that encounter in the gallery replayed in his head. The portraits, the plaques, the cold confidence in the curator's voice. He knew what it meant. Every move he and Evelyn had made had been tracked, studied, and calculated into something larger. Their entire war had been a theater for someone else's acquisition. The realization didn't fill him with fear, it filled him with fury. He poured black coffee into a chipped mug and stared at his reflection in the glass. "He wants control," Adrian murmured. "Let's see how he handles chaos." Within hours, he'd set up a hidden workstation using salvaged equipment from one of his old shell networks. Every message, every asset he still had access to, he pulled them in. He began leaking false data again, this time aimed not at Evelyn, but at Curatech. If the curator wanted to own them, he'd have to come down into the mud to do it. But before Adrian could go further, a familiar voice broke through his encrypted line. A voice he hadn't heard in months. "Still alive, I see." "Evelyn." He froze for a second, then leaned back in his chair, smirking faintly. "Barely. How'd you find this channel?" "I built it before you hijacked it from me. You always forget your ghosts have architects." He could almost hear the faint clink of glass in her hand. Wine, probably, her trademark morning ritual when she wanted to sound composed. "You're in Paris," she said. "My people saw you. What are you doing there, Adrian?" He hesitated. The instinct was to taunt her, but this time he knew better. "You've lost more than you realize," he said finally. "Someone's taking your companies. Curatech Holdings. Ring a bell?" There was silence on the other end. Then faintly, "Yes." "So you know." "Good. Then you understand why I'm here." "I understand that you're still incapable of letting anything go," she said sharply. "You think you're saving me, but you're just protecting your ego. You can't stand that someone else has beaten us at our own game." Her tone was calm, but there was a fracture beneath it. Fear. "Maybe," he said quietly. "But you're going to help me anyway." "I don't take orders from you." "You will," he said, "because whoever this curator is, he's already inside your systems. He's already moved your holdings offshore. You think you're still in control, Evelyn, but you're not. He's dismantling your empire while you're busy pretending not to care." The silence stretched long enough for Adrian to hear the faint hum of Paris in the background of his call, the same hum that pulsed outside his own window. "Send me everything you have," she said finally. A small smile flickered across his face. "I already did. Check your private terminal. Folder marked Inheritance." He heard her breath hitch as she opened it on her end. "How did you—" "I never stopped watching you, Evelyn, even when I should have." Her voice softened, almost imperceptibly. "You always did have a problem with boundaries. Call it curiosity," he said. There was another pause. Then Evelyn's tone shifted back to steel. "Fine, we do this together, for now. But when this is over, Adrian, you're next." He chuckled. Wouldn't have it any other way. For the first time in years, they were aligned, not as lovers, not as enemies, but as two predators circling a larger beast. Over the following days, they began working through the digital ruins of their past empires. Evelyn provided access to her old financial records. Adrian cracked into dormant databases that had once belonged to the Arden Foundation. What they discovered was terrifyingly elegant. Every transaction, every lost asset, every collapse, it all funneled into Curatech. And Curatech was expanding rapidly. It wasn't just buying corporations, it was integrating them. Media firms, biotech companies, data analytics groups, all being merged under one silent structure. A structure that seemed to have no borders, no public face, and no apparent goal other than omnipotence. It's like he's building a nervous system, Evelyn said one night as she scrolled through a stream of code. A living organism that feeds on control. Or worship, Adrian murmured. The way he talked, it's not about money. It's about order. They sat in silence for a moment, the glow of the screens painting their faces in cold blue light. Then Evelyn looked up. You met him, didn't you? Adrian nodded. In Paris. He wanted me to know. He wanted us to know. What did he say?
He said he doesn't destroy, Adrian replied. He inherits. Her expression darkened. Then let's make sure there's nothing left for him to inherit. Over the next week, they launched a digital war the world never saw. Ghost servers flickered alive across continents, fake companies rose and fell in hours, and global markets rippled with unexplained anomalies. Every time the curator tried to consolidate, they shattered his connections. It was chaos, controlled, deliberate chaos, the kind Adrian thrived on. But with every strike, he could feel the counterforce adapting. The curator wasn't reacting, he was learning. Then one night, Evelyn's screen froze mid-transmission. The line went dead. Adrian waited, tried to reconnect, then saw it, a single message flashing across his interface. You taught me well. His heart dropped. He hacked into her private feed, bypassing her security layers until he reached her live camera feed. The image flickered, static tearing through the frame, and then he saw her, Evelyn, standing in her penthouse, pale, motionless, staring at something off-screen. Behind her, on the wall, was a new projection, the Curatech symbol. Before Adrian could react, the feed cut. He slammed his fists against the desk. No, no, no! Outside, thunder rolled across Paris again, low and heavy. He knew what this meant. The curator had reached her first. And if Evelyn Arden had fallen, then everything they'd built, everything they'd fought for, was now in someone else's hands. He grabbed his coat, the encrypted drive still in his pocket, and headed into the storm. Whatever this empire was becoming, it had started with her humiliation and his revenge. But now it was becoming something far greater, something that neither of them had the power to stop alone. And for the first time, Adrian wondered if destroying Evelyn had only ever been part of someone else's masterpiece. The rain soaked through Adrian's coat as he raced through the narrow Parisian streets, his breath visible in the chill. The city glowed under the wet sheen of streetlights, blurred reflections rippling in puddles like fractured glass. He moved fast, his mind a storm of calculations and rage. Evelyn was in danger, or worse, already gone. The curator had crossed from shadow into reality, and that meant the game was changing. He reached her penthouse within half an hour, the guards gone, the lobby deserted. The elevator was offline, locked from a remote override, so he took the emergency stairs. The climb felt endless, each step echoing in the hollow shaft like a clock counting down to something inevitable. By the time he reached her floor, he could hear the faint hum of generators and the flicker of electricity. The door to her apartment stood ajar, a single shoe lying in the hallway, one he recognized. Black heel, Italian design. Evelyn's. He pushed the door open. The lights were dim, the penthouse transformed into something alien.
Screens lined the walls, flickering with images, data streams, financial graphs, all belonging to her empire. But every single one bore the same mark, a glowing white insignia of Curatech. It pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. He stepped over shattered glass and into the living room. "Evelyn," he called, his voice low but sharp. From the far side of the room came a soft sound, a breath, a faint movement. She was there, sitting on the floor beside her desk, her hair unkempt, eyes wide and distant. The proud, calculating woman he once knew looked disoriented, as though she had stared too long into something incomprehensible. "Evelyn." She turned her head toward him slowly, like someone waking from a dream. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. He knelt beside her, scanning the room. What happened? Her hands trembled slightly as she gestured toward the nearest screen. "He showed me everything. Every transaction, every deal I thought I controlled. He owns them all, Adrian! All of them!" He followed her gaze to the screens. There were maps now, global networks illuminated by threads of light, stretching across continents. Energy grids, tech companies, defense contracts, banks, each one tied to a single digital core. "He doesn't just want money," he said quietly. "He wants everything connected. He's turning it into one organism. Data, finance, communication, even government systems." Adrian frowned. "That's not possible. No one can maintain that kind of network." Her lips twitched into a broken smile. "He's not maintaining it. He's letting it evolve. That's what I didn't understand. Curatech isn't a company. It's a system that learns." He looked at her, realization dawning. "You're saying it's not just him?" She nodded. "He's the architect, but not the engine. The system runs itself now. It grows on fear, dependency, and control. Every time a corporation falls, Curatech absorbs it. Every failure makes it stronger." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Then we burn it down." Evelyn gave a soft, bitter laugh. "You think I didn't try? The moment I tried to shut it out, it turned my own safeguards against me. It's like it knows what we'll do before we do it." He stood, scanning the ceiling. Tiny surveillance drones hovered silently in the corners, their blue lights blinking in rhythm. He pulled out his signal disruptor and activated it. The lights flickered, then went dark. "We're leaving," he said firmly. She shook her head. "There's nowhere to go." "Yes, there is. You're not done yet, Evelyn. You built your empire from nothing. You can help me break his." She lifted her eyes to his, something fierce flickering through the exhaustion. "Why, Adrian? After everything? After what I did to you?" He hesitated for a long moment before answering. "Because he's mine to destroy, not his." For the first time that night, she smiled, a small, fractured echo of her old self. "You never change." They moved quickly after that. Adrian helped her to her feet and began packing what equipment they could salvage: portable drives, encryption chips, and access cards. But as they prepared to leave, the wall screen suddenly changed again. The Curatech symbol faded, replaced with a live feed, grainy, monochrome, showing both of them standing in the room. Adrian froze. Then came the voice. Calm, measured, chillingly familiar. "I warned you both. Chaos is a tool, not a weapon, and you are still trying to fight me with fire, while I build with silence." Evelyn backed toward the window, her face pale. "He's inside everything," she whispered. "Even this building." Adrian's mind raced. "Shut it down, now!" He slammed his disruptor against the main console. Sparks flew. The screams died instantly, plunging the penthouse into darkness except for the city lights bleeding through the rain-streaked glass. For a moment, only the sound of their breathing filled the air. Then Evelyn said, "We can't fight him from here. We need to go offline." Agreed.
They slipped out into the hallway, leaving the silent penthouse behind. Down the stairwell, across the lobby, out into the wet, empty street. Evelyn shivered but didn't complain. The city felt alive in a way that made Adrian uneasy. Streetlights flickering, traffic cameras following them subtly as they passed. "He's watching," she murmured. "I know, but we'll use it." They reached an old garage tucked between two decaying buildings. Adrian pried open the rusted door to reveal a black sedan covered in dust. Inside the trunk, beneath layers of old tarps, was what he'd come for, a portable server core, one of the last pieces of the silent circle, untouched.
He loaded it into the back seat. This can't connect to any modern network. It's pre-digital analog interface. If we rebuild from this, we can move without him seeing. Evelyn ran a hand across the cold metal casing. "You kept this." "I keep everything," Adrian said simply. They drove through the city in silence. Neon lights blurred past the windshield, and for a moment, Evelyn looked at him with something like recognition, like the ghosts of who they'd been before power ruined them both. Finally, she spoke. "You know this won't stop him. Whatever Curatech is, it's past human control now." Adrian's eyes stayed on the road. "Then we remind it that it came from us. Every system, every algorithm, it all started with human flaws, and flaws can be exploited." She leaned back in her seat, exhaustion weighing on her features. "You always did believe destruction was a kind of creation." He glanced at her, faint smile tugging at his lips. "Sometimes it's the only kind that matters." The rain eased as they reached the outskirts of Paris. The sky was heavy, dark, and endless. In the distance, beyond the old factories and power lines, the faint pulse of data centers glowed against the horizon. Massive, silent cathedrals of information. And somewhere in those circuits, the curator was waiting, watching, and listening. The road stretched endlessly before them, wet asphalt gleaming beneath the waning moonlight. The hum of the engine was the only sound between them, a fragile thread binding two souls who had burned the world in their pursuit of dominance, and now stood united against something far greater than their hate. Evelyn's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "You know," she said quietly, "when I humiliated you that night in front of the board, I thought I was ending you. I didn't realize I was creating something else, something that would come for me, too." Adrian didn't respond. His fingers tightened around the steering wheel. The rain had stopped, but the storm between them never really had. After several long moments, he said, "Everything ends, Evelyn. Empires, power, people. But what we built, the greed, the ambition, it doesn't die. It mutates. That's what he is. The curator isn't a man anymore. He's evolution." Evelyn turned her head, studying him. "Then how do you kill evolution?" Adrian's lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. "By corrupting it." They drove through the night until the city lights were distant stars behind them. At dawn, they arrived at a place few remembered. A decommissioned data vault buried beneath the Pyrenees Mountains. It had been one of Adrian's earliest creations, long before the Silent Circle, long before Evelyn had risen to her throne. A relic of a world that still believed humans could control their machines. The heavy doors groaned open as they entered. Dust rose like ghosts from the floor. Servers lined the vast chamber like steel tombstones, silent and cold. "This is where it started," Adrian said, his voice echoing. "Before the algorithms, before the networks, the first prototype of the circle, built to predict human behavior, not control it." Evelyn walked among the dead machines, her heels clicking softly. "And you think we can end him from here?" "No," Adrian said, "but we can remind him what he is." He began connecting the portable core they'd brought, sparks flickering as power returned to the old servers. The air filled with a low hum, growing louder, almost alive. Evelyn joined him, her hands steadied despite the tension trembling beneath her skin. On the screens, lines of code began to scroll. The language was old, archaic, from the early architecture of their empire. Adrian was merging it with fragments of Curatech's signal, slowly, dangerously. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Teaching him doubt," Adrian murmured. "He's built on our data, our logic, but we are flawed, emotional, unpredictable. If I feed those contradictions back into his core, he'll start questioning his own design."
"That could destroy everything," she said. He looked at her, eyes cold but alive. "That's the idea." For hours they worked in silence, rewriting their sins into the machine. Lines of code collided like waves. Every keystroke felt like defiance against the inevitable. Outside, the first rays of dawn broke through the storm clouds, slicing light through the mountain's fog. Then, as the sequence neared completion, the screens flickered, and his voice returned. "You think you can rewrite creation?" The curator's tone was calm, almost curious. "I am your reflection. You cannot destroy me without destroying yourselves." Evelyn stepped forward, eyes blazing. Maybe that's the point. The room trembled as the servers surged with power. The temperature spiked, lights flashing red. Adrian's code began to take hold, rewriting fragments of Curatech's logic into chaos. But the system fought back, adapting, countering every command. "You are nothing without control, and control is what I am." Adrian slammed his hand onto the console, voice rising with fury. "No! You're what's left when control destroys itself." The lights flared, then shattered. The chamber plunged into darkness, save for one screen still glowing faintly. It displayed a single word: error. For a moment, nothing moved. Then Evelyn let out a shaky breath. Did it work? Adrian stared at the screen, his reflection fractured across its cracked surface. "I don't know." They waited. The servers began to power down one by one, the noise fading into silence. The faint glow of dawn seeped through the cracks in the vault, touching the broken floor with pale gold. For the first time in years, there was peace. And yet, deep in that silence, Adrian felt something stir. Not mechanical, but human. The awareness of consequence. Evelyn turned to him. "What happens now?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Now, we see if the world remembers who it belongs to." They left the vault together. Outside, the mountains stretched endless and ancient, the air crisp and thin. The world felt quieter, lighter, as if the unseen pulse of Curatech had faded. But as they descended the rocky path, Evelyn's phone buzzed softly. No signals should have existed this high. She froze, then pulled it from her coat. The screen flickered and a single notification appeared. Inheritance. Update. Complete. Her breath caught. "Adrian." He turned, and for an instant the light caught his face in a way that made him look older, almost haunted. "She's not gone," she whispered. "No," he said. "But maybe now he's afraid." Evelyn looked at him, the corner of her mouth lifting in a faint, exhausted smile. "You always did prefer your victories messy." Adrian exhaled slowly. "They're the only ones that last." They began walking again, side by side, down the long path toward the valley. Behind them, the mountain vault sealed itself automatically, the ancient doors closing with a final, resonant thud. Somewhere, buried within the labyrinth of data that once spanned continents, the Curatech system rebooted. For the first time since its creation, it hesitated. Its algorithms pulsed with indecision. new lines of corrupted code spreading through its architecture like veins of doubt.
And amid that doubt, echoes of two human voices intertwined. Not commands, not control, but something the machine could neither quantify nor erase. Fear, regret, hope. It processed them endlessly, searching for logic in what had none. Days later, in cities across the world, screens flickered unexpectedly. Some showed brief distortions, others fragments of faces long thought erased. Adrian's, Evelyn's, grainy and fading. Then, as quickly as they appeared, the images vanished. The world continued on, unaware that its strings had been cut and tied anew, looser, freer, for now. In a quiet cafe in Madrid, Evelyn sat by a window, her hair tied back, a newspaper folded beside her untouched coffee. The headline spoke of markets stabilizing, networks recovering, new opportunities rising from the ashes of the old. Across the street, Adrian watched her from a distance, expression unreadable. She felt his gaze before she saw him, a flicker of recognition passing between them like lightning. Brief, powerful, dangerous. Neither smiled, neither waved. They simply understood. For all their destruction, for all their pride, they had done something neither could have imagined when their war began. They had rewritten the ending. And somewhere far beyond their sight, in the vast circuitry of what remained of Kurotech, a final message pulsed faintly across the network. The architects have reclaimed the fire. Then silence, and in that silence, the world began again.